Let's solve these quadratic equations by completing the square. The first thing we need to realize when we do completing the square is our equation needs to be in this form. You're also going to notice that I don't have an a out here. My a has to be a 1. Also, you're going to notice the c is on the end. Let's look at our first one. X squared minus 6x minus 10. We need it to look like this. X squared plus bx equals c. Now, just because I wrote a plus there doesn't mean it has to be a plus. It could be a minus also. But our equation isn't in that form, so we need to make it in that form. So I'm going to add 10 to both sides. This gives us x squared minus 6x equals 10. Now, a lot of books make this super confusing. Some instructors make it super confusing, but let me break it down for you. All we're going to do is we're going to make a parentheses, square it. My variable is x. I'm going to put an x here, equals, and I'm going to bring down my 10. The next step is to take the middle term and divide by 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Now, we need to keep things balanced. So if I look here, I was adding negative 3 squared. So that's what I have to do on the other side. I'm going to add negative 3 squared. Let's do some simplifying. We'll end up with x minus 3 squared equals 10. Negative 3 squared is 9. This gives us x minus 3 squared equals 19. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. We need to get the x by itself. That's what we're trying to do. Anytime we have a square equal to something, what we're going to do is we're going to use the square root property, which says we're going to take the square root of both sides. So let's do that. I'm going to take the square root of this side and the square root of that side. Now the square and the square root are going to cancel. So we're going to end up with x minus 3 equals, when I look at 19, I first ask myself, is there a perfect square in 19? And there's not. So we're just going to end up with plus or minus the square root of 19. Let me rewrite it without the parentheses. X minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 19. Now at this point, we can get x by itself. I'm simply going to add 3 to both sides. All I'm doing is algebra, nothing fancy here. So I'll have 3 plus or minus the square root of 19. And that turns out to be my answer. Now, if you're using MyLab Math or Math Excel or another online program, you might have to split it up to saying 3 plus the square root of 19, comma, 3 minus the square root of 19. But that's it. Let's look at this equation. Remember, first, it has to be an x squared plus bx equals c form. And it is, so we don't need to do anything. Now we're going to make our parentheses squared equals, my variable is x, and we have 28 on that side. And now we're going to divide the middle by 2. So divide by 2, well, that's going to give us negative 3 halves. Now don't freak out because we have a fraction, okay? So once again, this is negative 3 halves squared, so I'm going to add negative 3 halves squared on the other side. So what exactly is this going to look like? Well, it's going to look like x minus 3 halves squared equals 28 plus negative 3 halves times negative 3 halves is 9/4. All right, what we need to do next is we need to put these two together. So on the side here, I'm just going to show you how you could do it by hand. Since 4 is my denominator, I need something over 4. Well, I'm going to have to take 28 times 4. So we're going to have x minus 3 halves squared equals 112 over 4 plus 9/4. Well, 9 plus 112, so 112 plus 9, 9, 10, 11. So we have 121. That's pretty cool. I'm going to bring this up here. Now we're going to have x minus 3 halves squared equals 121 over 4. Now we have something squared equal to a number. We're going to take the square root of both sides. Now you could have done this, by the way, in a calculator, no big deal. On the left side, we're going to have x minus 3 halves equals Now on the right side, let's kind of look at this. That's the same thing as saying the square root of 121 over the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 121 happens to be 11, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we're going to end up having plus or minus 11 over 2. Hey, that's not looking too bad, is it? We need to solve for x, so I'm going to add 3 halves to both sides. I want to get x by itself again. So x equals 3 halves plus or minus 11 over 2. Well, at this point, we can break it up into two separate equations. We can say x equals 3 halves plus 11 over 2. Well, 3 halves plus 11 over 2, we have a common denominator. So we can call this 14 over 2, which is 7. All right, that's our first answer. Let's do the second one. We'll have 3 halves minus 11 over 2. We have a common denominator, so 3 minus 11 is negative 8 over 2, and negative 8 over 2 is negative 4. And so those are our two answers for that one. Let's look at the last one here. 2x squared minus 12x plus 14. Now for this one, we want it to look like x squared plus bx equals c. First of all, hopefully you noticed we have a problem because we don't have a 1 as our leading coefficient. So we need to make it a 1. So we divide everything by whatever our leading coefficient happens to be. And in this case, it's a 2. We'll have x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 0. Well, that's cool. But we still have a problem because it's not actually in this form yet, is it? So I have to subtract 7 from both sides. So we'll have x squared minus 6x equals negative 7. From here, remember, we're going to make our parentheses. Squared equals, our variable is x equals negative 7. We just bring that right down. Now we need to divide the middle term by 2. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Remember, balance, balance, balance. Negative 3 squared, well, we're adding that here. So what we have to do is we have to add negative 3 squared on this side also. And that makes everything balanced. So let's see what we have. X minus 3 squared equals negative 7 plus negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. So let's keep simplifying. X minus 3 squared equals negative 7 plus 9 is positive 2. Well, at this point, we have something squared equal to a number. We're going to take the square root of both sides. And that gives us x minus 3 equals, now I can't reduce 2, so we're going to have plus or minus the square root of 2. At this point, we're just going to solve for x. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. X equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 2. Now, if you have to divide this up, you'll have 3 plus the square root of 2, comma, 3 minus the square root of 2. And guess what? You did it. You did completing the square. Good job.